Coordinator at the American Political Science Association. Thank you all for joining us today for this webinar on tips for effective online teaching. This is a joint effort on the part of the American Political Science Association and the American Society for Public Administration. We have two professors leading the webinar today. First, Melanie Smith, Professor of Public Administration at Park University, and then Bruce Wilson, Professor of Political Science at the University of Central Florida. Melanie and Bruce will each speak for about 15 minutes, and then there will be time for questions after. You can submit a question at any time during the webinar. Please use the Q&A function at the top of your screen to submit a question. As questions, they will be queued, and then Bruce and Melanie will answer them at the end of their presentations. Also, be aware that this webinar will be recorded, and a link to the video will be posted on the APSA website. So without further ado, we can get started. I think Melanie is going first.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on this webinar. My name is Dr. Melanie Smith. I teach at Park University in the Master of Public Administration program. My concentration and area of specialty is disaster and emergency management. I have been a face-to-face student and teacher, as well as an online student and teacher. So I bring both perspectives to this presentation and to my current professional work. I have been in higher education since the early 1990s, but I'm a recent PhD. This is actually my first time teaching full-time. I've been at Park for about 3 years, and I teach both face-to-face and online courses here, and I have taught face-to-face and online courses at other places as an adjunct as well. So what I would like to discuss for the next few minutes is how face-to-face classes and online classes are similar and different, and also some different methods for conducting online experiences. Really, the focus for online teaching is to be very student-centric, to be very much aware of what the student experience is in that online classroom. In an online classroom, you do not have that immediate facial body language feedback from the students. So you have to be a lot more aware of what the students are thinking and any problems that they have by getting to know your students in a different way. So we'll talk about some of that. So first, I want to talk about some different terminology that is used in online education. Synchronous, asynchronous, virtual, blended, hybrid, instructor-led. These are all terms that you can find in a fairly quick search of online classes across the internet. So different universities call online education by different terms. Sometimes they mean something unique. So we'll talk about these terms. I also want to emphasize that if you are new to teaching online, it is not the same as taking a traditional face-to-face lecture and just posting it on a discussion board. There's a lot more work that is involved with this. Now, that being said, if you can be an effective teacher in a face-to-face classroom, there are certain techniques that are effective face-to-face that you can then transfer to that online classroom. There are some things that are unique about an online classroom, but certainly the effective teaching that you do face-to-face, don't forget about those skills that you have. Use those skills and adapt them to the online environment. I will also mention that there's quite a bit of research in online learning and online teaching. Dr. Bruce Wilson will talk about some of that research and talk about some of the applications of that research. I will be talking more in some generalities about online classes and then offer some tips that I have picked up either from my own experiences or from some other sources. So students view online education as valuable because they say they can take a class whenever they want, which is true. As a former online student, I was able to continue my full-time job and my family commitments and still take classes and earn my degree. But I had to fit in my classes around all my other obligations. That is very important to keep in mind when you're talking about online students. If they are working full-time and have family obligations, they are working their classes around the rest of their life. So it's just something you have to be aware of. From an instructor viewpoint, some instructors like teaching online because they can get into the classroom whenever they want. They're not stuck to showing up to room 301 from 9 to 9:50 Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So that is certainly one of the benefits of teaching online, is that flexibility. So let's talk about some of these different types of online courses. A synchronous class can be online using technology, but you have some students, or maybe all the students, who are attending the class from someplace else. So they could be sitting at work, joining in via Skype or the learning management platform that your university is using. And everybody is in class together. It's just through the computer. Asynchronous class offerings are not real time. There's a discussion board or some sort of area where the students can go into a learning management system like a Blackboard, eCollege, Desire to Learn, Canvas, and there are others as well. And they post homework, discussions, questions, assignments. They take tests, quizzes, whenever it fits into their schedule throughout the assignment time period. A virtual environment is a blend of synchronous and traditional, where you might have some people in an actual classroom with an actual instructor, and other students are streaming the class from someplace else. So they are listening to the class real time, but they're just not in the physical classroom. Blended or hybrid has gained a lot of popularity in recent years. This is a combination of using traditional face-to-face classes and an online component. This is especially beneficial for classes that are in the evening, that are traditional, maybe from 5 to 10 in the evening. And for a working adult with a family, that's a long time to spend in class. So if you do a blended or hybrid, part of the time you're in class, maybe 3 hours instead of 5, and then the other 2 hours, the students are like online students, they're doing their work online. Not all online education is instructor-led. There are independent study courses out there where they're online and you do them on your own. There may be somebody in the background checking an assignment, but the instructor is not leading the course. What I'm going to be talking about here, and what Dr. Wilson will be talking about, are the online courses where there's actually a faculty member, a teacher in that course. So again, effective online courses cannot just be thrown together. You can't just walk into your office, pick up your notes, and go scan them to the computer and have an online class. You also cannot use the same lecture you've always used. One of the things that students like about online education is that the information can be very current and up to date. And so it demands a lot from the instructor to stay current in the field and post current issues and current topics, research, stay up to date. And so there's more time that is involved in preparing an online course. There's also much more intentional time management. You cannot just tell yourself you'll get into the classroom whenever you have a few minutes and grade some papers. You actually do have to set aside time throughout your work week that is dedicated to that class, as if it were that class from 9 to 9:50 Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You do have to set aside that time. It is flexible. Maybe you get into your class and grade at 10 o'clock at night, but you do have to make sure that you're in your class communicating with your students. So how can you be a better online teacher? A lot of the same ideas from being an effective classroom teacher. Consider your strengths and weaknesses. What do you do well in a face-to-face classroom? What do your students like about how you teach? What do you like about being in an online class? If you have never been a student in an online class, I would challenge you to find a class somewhere to be a student in that online class and experience it from that side. That will help you see the things that you like and don't like. Your teaching weaknesses from a face-to-face classroom may be some of the same things that you experience in online. So you need to understand what those weaknesses are. And then understand what the students expect from their online experiences. They understand they're online. They will not have the immediate face-to-face interaction with their classmates. They want a lot of information at their fingertips right now. When they have a question or problem, they want answers right now because they're doing their homework after the kids go to bed, before they get ready for work the next day. They're time limited, and so they expect the online classroom to work. Any web links, the web links need to function and go where they're supposed to go. Any videos need to work, and it needs to be timely feedback from their peers and from the instructor. And of course, as teachers ourselves, we have to be willing to learn and improve our teaching. So find a mentor who teaches well online, who enjoys the online experience, and get some tips from that person. Have somebody come into your online classroom and tell you what they see and offer suggestions. Attend a webinar like this. Find some readings about how to teach online and some good tips. And then learn about the available technology. It's not just about posting a PowerPoint online and having the students click through it. There's so much available technology, and Dr. Wilson will talk about some of that. So I want to finish up here with some specific tips. Get to know your students. Know them individually. Greet them. Require them to put in an introduction in class. Introduce yourself. Welcome the students as a group, as individuals. Interact with the students on the discussion boards. Let them see your presence there in the classroom. Also provide personal feedback in any kind of private grading area. So you don't want to be critical of the students out in the public discussion boards, but they are looking for feedback. Do that grading feedback privately. Make sure you learn how your platform works. Have your IT people set up a practice classroom for you to go into, and so that you can click through all the buttons and try everything and see how it works, and see if you can turn the online experience into the student view, so then you can see what the students are seeing. That will help you answer questions about if the class is not working the way it's supposed to, or links are not working, or students ask where can they find that information. You will have found it yourself if you have gone and explored through the classroom. So then you will be able to give the students the answers that they're looking for. Make sure you are accessible to the students. Make sure your contact information is easy to find, preferably near the front of the homepage, or near the front of the classroom, or a link where they can click on a tab and get your contact information right there. Again, these students are time limited. If they're taking an online class for the flexibility, they're time limited. When they have a question or concern about the class, they need answers quickly. If you're working on a Monday through Sunday time schedule for a course, the student may have Tuesday that they have off from work, and that's when they're doing their class. So if they send you an email asking a question on Tuesday, and you don't get back to them until Thursday, you have missed that opportunity to interact with that student, and it will cause frustration on the student side. For complicated issues, consider a phone call. Just because it's an online class does not mean that you cannot actually talk to the student. Or if they're a local student, have them come to your office or meet them someplace else, for coffee or something. But you're not limited to just online. Be involved in the class, post more than just weekly announcement, get into the discussion boards, model the behavior that you want the students to have. So if you want the students to be engaged in the discussion boards, you need to be engaged in the discussion boards. If you expect the students to be respectful of each other, you must be respectful of the students. If you expect good grammar and spelling and citations and formatting, you need to do that as well. Do remind the students of upcoming dates and activities. Just like any students, time may get away from them, so just keep them up to date on things. And then finally, the online course structure. Organize your content into units or modules. Show the students how the modules and units fit together. Have a framework of the class right at the beginning of the class so they can see where the class is going, kind of in one picture. How are the topics connected together? You can do this using a graphic or even just a well-designed syllabus. But they want to know where they're going in the class. Make sure the students have accessibility to all the content, graphics, videos. Some of this might be computer limitations, some of it might be disability limitations. I suggest that you refer to your IT department to assist with any of those issues. Make sure all the web links work, if you have any of that. Encourage the class interaction, ask open-ended discussion questions, provide grading rubrics and share those with the students so they know what you are expecting from them. You can still use group projects and other experiential learning. It may change a little bit what it looks like and how it feels. Sometimes online students get frustrated with online group projects, but they can work and they can be very successful, and it gets the students interacting with each other a little bit more. So Dr. Bruce Wilson will now continue and talk about more of the technology and some of the research that underlines online teaching.
Bruce, I think you're muted. Bruce, do you want to unmute your microphone? There you go.
Is that muted?
Yes, you're.
Okay, can you see my screen? Can you see the screen yet?
Yes.
Okay, so, okay, I agree with everything that Melanie said, and I think these are really good comments about online teaching. I teach at a slightly different institution. The University of Central Florida has 63,000 students. We have many of our online students are also actually face-to-face students, and so they do a mix of classes that they're actually taking. My experience with this is I've been teaching online since the late 1990s, and since 2000 I have worked in a research group that has tracked what students learn and what they don't learn in online environments. And as it turns out, actually, and Melanie hinted at this, the driving factor in effective teaching in online and face-to-face is actually the instructor. So this is the key here, right? So if you're a good online teacher, you'll probably be a good face-to-face teacher, and vice versa. There's no magic there in what comes out of the technology. There's also a whole bunch of other things that we've investigated to find out what's best practice or what's the most effective way to teach people in online environments. Okay, so just to go back again to reinforce a couple of the things that Dr. Smith mentioned, right? One is class structure. Fundamentally important that you have it all structured from the very beginning of the class so the students know exactly where it is that they're going and what they're going to be doing. Deadlines aren't fungible, generally speaking, right? If you say that there's going to be an exam or a test or something on March 15th, then there needs to be a test on March 15th or students will be going crazy trying to figure it out. And one of the things about online teaching is it's often, if there's an error there, or if you do something that students aren't expecting, it's like spooking a herd, and then the herd just like dissipates. And it's really, really difficult to pull that class back together again if you make some colossal error at the beginning of the semester. So clarity is fundamentally important in both the syllabus and in the instructions. And like Melanie, I actually use modules to guide the students through the class. This is an image of my current class that's running right now. It has roughly 350 students in it. What I tried to, this is the instructive view, but what I'm trying to show you here is that on the left-hand side, you can see what the students actually get to see. So it's the syllabus, the announcements, the modules, the grades. So it's the minimum of what they should see, so they don't end up having an overload of information or going to the wrong places. I also use, as you can't actually see here because it didn't come out, but I use like videos to guide the students through these things. But we'll talk about that in a minute. Again, Melanie mentioned this question about feedback, and we actually did some research on this, right? And students get really, really antsy if they don't get the feedback quickly. But that's problematic because you also need to give them feedback that's actually comprehensive and useful. So what we do is we structure this class in a way that the early assignments are low stakes assignments, like writing assignments. And then the feedback on the low stakes ones will give them ideas about how they can improve that for the next one. So as the semester builds, the size of the assignment will build. So you're starting off from like maybe at the beginning of the semester, short paragraphs about X or Y, and by the end of the semester, they're going to write a 10-page paper. But the interim period, you've given them this feedback, and if they're reading the feedback, then they know in the next iteration how to write a stronger paper, how perhaps to use citations better, perhaps how to construct an argument better. And so that it moves through like that. Another thing that I found really important in online classes, which you probably do quite naturally in a face-to-face class, and that is to do risk assessment of students. I mean, I'm not talking about whether they're going to go off and start binge drinking, but just the question about how are they performing in the class? And one of the nice things about online classes is that the data flows constantly. And so it populates grade books, it populates discussion boards, it populates essay banks, all sorts of things that you can track and give the students feedback or reach out to students to find out what their issues are and what perhaps can happen to make them more effective learners in that particular class. So one other technique that we use in these large classes, right? Because I mean, you can't have a discussion with 100 students in it, right? Just like if it is a face-to-face class, what you tend to find happen in a face-to-face class is the people who dominate the conversation are not necessarily the ones that know best or understand the material the best, but the ones with the loudest voices. You can fill in the blanks as to who you might think those might be. The nice thing about discussions in an online environment is you can actually force the students to stay focused by using asynchronous discussions. You can actually allow them to think about what they're saying, so they don't actually have to think on their feet. They can write more substantive comments rather than just writing or yelling out whatever they fancy from the class floor. So even in my face-to-face classes, I use online discussions just because I find it very useful to see how students are actually thinking about these things, how they construct ideas, and also to have a concrete record of what people are actually saying. We've also found that students actually learn a lot from their peers, which is sort of interesting, right? Because you think if they're just like shooting from the hip, then there's probably not much to learn there. But in the online environment where they're actually having to substantiate their statements and provide support for their assertions, students learn quite a lot from that. And because these are devoid, as Dr. Smith pointed out, they're devoid of much of the background noise that comes from a face-to-face discussion, so you don't have to watch people screwing up their faces whilst you're trying to make your point. You don't have to watch the couple in the back row making out. You don't have to watch people read newspapers whilst you're trying to say something. All of that is removed. But what's also removed then is also, as Melanie pointed out, the body language or any sort of intonation questions about how are they phrasing this, and then getting a better idea. But you can accommodate some of that. So we've also done studies to figure out, well, what's the best composition of groups? Because like I say, I mean, some of our classes are very small, they might be 20, and some of them are very large. I have a colleague who teaches 1,600 students in an online class. My largest class is around about 450, it's the biggest it's been. And so what we do in that is we will assign students randomly to smaller groups. And the groups will be, we found that if it goes much below 10, then some students don't show up, then the actual the momentum of the discussion can grind to a halt very quickly. And if it goes above 12, it's usually a little bit too noisy to try and get your head around what's actually happening in that discussion. We've also found that by using these small groups and keeping them constant across the semester, is that we create what, for want of a better term, is learning community. They start to actually have secondary conversations among themselves that are ancillary to the core discussion that they might be having, but they're actually additive to that, right? So they're like social conversations that might be peppered around the actual central conversation, which I think is actually a very good thing, because they also start to understand that these people are in the exact same position that they're in, and that they can learn from them, and that they can maybe help each other. And for me, these online classes, I mean, I encourage collaboration. I don't see it as a competitive sport. And so to encourage them to work together, I think is very useful. The other thing that we discovered is if you might think that, well, we should really have gendered groups, because there used to be a lot of literature that said that women were at a disadvantage in online classes. It turns out that's actually not true. But what we also found is that if we controlled the mix of gender within a class, it turns out that all male groups talk quite a lot. All female groups talk less to each other, but still okay. But the mixed groups, I mean, anywhere from like 75-25 right through to 25-75 in male-female, were actually the best groups, because these were actually the ones that talked the most. They had the most substantive. And we ran this over a number of semesters, so we had like lots and lots of data to work from. But it turns out that we don't bother to try and gender neutralize groups. We randomize them, and generally speaking, they end up with these mixed genders. Another thing you can do with groups, which I find quite useful, is it's sort of like for generating knowledge. And what I do, for example, in my Latin American politics class, I will, at the very beginning of the class, we ask them to pick a country, and we give them directions about what we're interested in that country. And they do these narrated PowerPoint slides, just like you would do in a face-to-face class. And the software's there. It's not difficult for them to access it. Not at my campus, they get it for free. And then they upload these to their groups. And so whilst they've had to, say, do Nicaragua, then somebody else in the group, they all have to do different countries. And so they focus their efforts on discovering this information and analyzing information about Nicaragua. The other 9 members of the group are going to do 9 other countries. And then they get to read across the groups. And so they get all this extra information about these other countries while only actually having to focus on one. And this is used in face-to-face classes too, but I find it particularly useful in online classes. Some people want to do lectures. I find them useful in certain ways. And this is a piece of free software that I use called Screencast-O-Matic. It's a little problematic. You can pay a little bit extra, and then it works a bit better, which is actually what I do. And this is an example. I guess when this is not live, you can probably actually go here and click on this, and you can see how it actually works. You could insert yourself in here in a little bubble on the bottom, and they could actually watch you give the lecture. What I found it very useful for is if you're explaining something that's very complicated, or you have to walk through a process, this is really, really good, because it follows your cursor across the screen, and you can hear your voice for doing demonstrations, etc. There's a bajillion other versions of this, right? Screencast-O-Matic is the one I use, but there's a whole bunch of others. Simulations and games are another thing that, I mean, particularly IR for some reason, like they have lots of this software. There's a link here that I've added in, and it gives software links for links to freely available online simulations or games for political science, for IR, comparative, American politics. I mean, all sorts of different ones. Students tend to love these. I mean, I'm perplexed. I actually don't understand the IR ones, but that's because I'm not an IR person. But I mean, apparently students love those sorts of interactions, and they learn a lot from them. The last thing, and this again echoes what Melanie was saying, is this question about just because it's an online class doesn't mean people can't come and see you, right? You shouldn't sort of draw up some artificial barrier there and say that you can't deal with them. What I found useful is, like I say, some of our students are face-to-face and just happen to be taking an online class. Others, I've had students generally like serving military who end up in foreign countries who can still take the class, but because they've been called to active duty, it interrupts their class, and so this works for them. And I've had them in Pakistan, at the embassy. One of them was actually the embassy when it got blown up, never missed a single deadline, but they can be anywhere. But the ones who are on campus can come see you. The others, I mean, there's Google Hangouts, which I use, WhatsApp, which everyone in Europe uses, everyone in Latin America uses, very few people here for some reason use. You can still use telephones or Skype or whatever, but it's making yourself accessible so that they can actually contact you and deal with any issues that they actually have. So I think I'll leave it at that right now, and we can deal with like questions and queries and concerns that the audience might have.
Well, thank you, Bruce. This is Melanie, and I've had an ongoing conversation with one of our viewers about the amount of work in the classes, in the online class, and how do you know how much work is appropriate for graduate courses, especially for an 8-week class. A 16-week class, I think many of us are familiar with those, and we can judge the amount of work, but 8 weeks is very fast to get through graduate material. And whether it's an online or face-to-face class, 8 weeks, it's not half the work of a 16-week class. It is the same amount of work in half the time, which means the students will feel like they are doing twice the work. They will feel like it is a lot of work. But that's the requirement in order to make a 3-credit class appropriate for accreditation purposes. So you have to find maybe the right mix of assignments that makes it right for the particular class, the topic, the student population you're working with. I've given the example, and I'm guessing that everybody can see the answered questions. I gave an example of what I do in my 8-week classes with a combination of discussion boards and written assignments. It's whatever works for your class and whatever you want from the students. I like to emphasize a lot of group interaction, especially when I'm teaching emergency management, which is by its nature a very collaborative field. So I want my students to reach out and build those relationships with each other, because that is what the professional field is all about. So I emphasize the discussions and a lot of interaction with the students in my class. So the choice of what you do is what works for you and for that particular topic. Bruce, how do you decide the types of assignments and how much assignment that you give?
Well, we basically have 2 types of semesters, right? So there's the spring and the fall semester, which are traditional 15, 16-week semesters. In the summer, we actually have a reduced one to 6 weeks. And like you say, because of accreditation from the relevant agencies, I mean, these have to be exactly at least the same content as traditional classes. So it's, if they're going to take a reduced time class, like one that is truncated, then they're going to have to just work harder. There's no way around that I can see. We have to get through the same material in a short or a long one. And I also teach a face-to-face 10-day PhD course in Norway every summer. And that one deals with, it's only 1 credit, right? But I mean, it deals with much of the same stuff I would deal with in a traditional 16-week class, but that's the only thing they're doing. And I don't see any way around this problem.
Sometimes it's a little bit of a challenge for the older student who has been out of school for a number of years. And when they went to school, maybe this student went to a traditional face-to-face university with standard 15 and 16-week semesters. And now they're coming to grad school and they're taking these short sessions. And back, they remember as an undergrad, they took 12 credits in a semester, or 15 credits, or maybe 18 credits. You know, that's 4, 5, 6 classes a semester. Well, with these short terms, whether they're 8-week terms during the school year or the 6-week condensed terms in the summer, it's very difficult for these students to take more than one class at a time. The problem with that is that it can potentially lengthen the number of terms, the number of years that they're spending in grad school. So it is a trade-off. With some good planning and good advising, you can assist the students with getting through a 36 credit program in 2 years if they're taking summer classes as well. So if they're going full time, they can do it, without taking summers off. We have a question from Iraq about any study or comments from the experience about the impact of time differences between a student and teacher. Go ahead, Bruce.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what I was alluding to earlier. So we actually have a lot of this, and the thing to do is, or what we do, is say that all times that we're interested in are in Florida time, right? Which means that they know from the get-go that if I say the deadline is 11 o'clock on a Monday evening, then they know that we're talking Florida time. So. And we do get this, right? Because I get people from Texas telling me that, it's only 9 o'clock in Texas, but for some reason it's closed. So the fact is that it's 11 o'clock in Florida, right? So although they're 2 hours behind us, they also have 2 hours the day before where they could have done the work. So I'm not that sympathetic to the time zone thing. I've had, like I say, students in Japan and all sorts of places that have not. Once they understand where the time zone lies, then they can deal with that quite easily, I think.
And I think with the current technology and a lot of these learning platforms, there's also the ability to record a live session. For example, you could potentially have a class where it is asynchronous. So the underlying class, it's just online, straight online, students post whatever they feel like it. But then you might decide to have a synchronous class meeting because there's a specific topic that you want the entire class to come together and provide feedback on. But you have a student in Iraq or the Philippines. Again, I also have students from around the world. So these students are not necessarily going to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning their time in order to join a 1-hour class in Central Time at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So what I've done in the past and what works out well is to record our live session. And our learning management system allows us to do this. But I will record the session, and Bruce talked about it with the screencast, record the session, post it in the classroom, and then the students who are on opposite time zones can come in later and watch that recording. You can encourage them to watch the recording by giving them credit if they post discussion questions or discussion answers based on that recording. So even though they're not having the benefit of the live discussion, they can watch the recording, they can see what the discussions were, and they can participate in it after the fact. What other questions do we have? And I see a chat here from Jay Morrison 5 that she feels much better. We have eased her concerns about the assignment load. So that's good.
Well, I have a question, Melanie. You mentioned trying to get to know your students, and I've never taught an online class. And how do you go about doing that, other than introduce themselves?
Sure.
Are there any particular strategies?
Well, fortunately, in my area, in the emergency management area, I actually talk by phone with every single one of my new admissions. So I know them, I spend time with them before we even get into class. Before they've even taken their first class, I'll talk with them on the phone. So, and we've exchanged email. So by the time that I finally get them into one of my classes, I've already met them myself and they've already met me. So it's a matter of them meeting their classmates. So what we do is one of the very first pages that they go into in their online class is an introductions page. And it's simply, it looks like a discussion board. And the students post whatever they're comfortable with posting. We give some suggestions, what's your major, what's your concentration, how many courses have you completed, how close are you to graduation, what kind of job experiences, work or life experiences do you have that you're willing to share or that others may find interesting, and anything else that you'd like to share. And so the first time a student takes a class and posts an introduction, it's very stilted. My name is, this is my first class, studying emergency management, and I have no experience in the field, and I hope to learn something more about emergency management from this class. But then, of course, I respond back. I welcome them to the class, and this is a public welcome. I'm glad you're here in the class. I enjoyed talking with you over the phone, a month ago. I look forward to having you in class. And I also encourage the students to welcome each other. Some of our classes, we give points, actual point credit for going in and doing the introduction. What I have found, and this is purely anecdotal, I haven't done any research or readings on this, but what I've learned from my students is by the time they've been in a couple of classes, they use the introduction to catch up with their classmates that they feel like they know, because they've seen these same people in class over and over and over again, and they've built up this relationship. So they use the introduction to update people. Yeah, well, our new baby was born, over spring break, and I'm really busy now, or whatever. And so the students just kind of jump right in. Hey, congratulations! Glad to hear it. Glad everything went well. And so the introduction is just kind of it's almost like a cyber cafe, is how a lot of my students end up using that. So it's a good way to it's up right front, like I said, one of the very first pages they go to in the class, so they don't have to hunt and search for it. It's tabbed, they can click right on it, they know they need to go there, and it's a good way to get the class going.
Great, thanks. I guess if there are no other pressing questions, we might be finished. So, and we're just about at time, so that works out. Thank you everyone. Those who, looks like there is one more question coming from Murat. I assume he's typing.
And then Julia, there's also a chat about the availability of this online. Can you share that information?
Yes, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the APSA website in maybe a week, and I'll email a link out to everybody who registered so they have it. And the other question is up if you'd like to take it, Melanie or Bruce.
Okay, is it recommendable to center the homework of the student on the actual workplace or let them focus on different topics? Oh, now I love when we get international perspectives. I'm from public administration, Bruce is from the political science side, but I'm going to speak for him and say that I bet that he enjoys, since he teaches in Northern Europe, that he enjoys an international perspective as well. So absolutely, in my classes, whenever it's appropriate, I encourage, and whenever the students are comfortable, again, doing this, I encourage my international students to share their experiences. So my online discussions are always two parts to it. tell me about the readings or the assignments this week, and then how does this apply to your experiences, your life, your work? So I think that kind of gets both of it. It allows the student to demonstrate that they did read the assignments or work through the assignments, but it also allows them the opportunity to apply that to what's important to them, their work environment, or if they're an international student or living wherever they're living around the world or in the US. It's a good application of those experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I have a slightly different take on this. I generally, in my Latin American class, for example, when students have to pick a country, there's generally a ban on them picking their own country or where their parents came from. And the reason for this is that they can talk about it in the discussions, that's for sure, and add stuff. But one of the problems is that I find, at least my experience has been, that they're less likely to be objective about where they come from. For example, right now we have a lot of Venezuelans here in Central Florida, and I really don't need to hear what their parents think about Chavez or Maduro or anybody else in Venezuela, right? But it would be helpful if they take their personal upbringings and then they maybe applied it to the Chilean case, right? And then maybe somebody from Chile could do the one on Venezuela. And then you have a slightly different perspective, right? But what you're not getting, I mean, so what I'm trying to drive at is that sometimes, in your case, I would make the Turkish student do something on Latin America rather than do it on the Turkish one, right? He can discuss with other people, perhaps, who are doing Turkey, how it works. And I think that would be a useful peer-to-peer learning exercise. But if he's talking about Turkey specifically, and that's where they're from, then I'm sure there's going to be a fair amount of baggage that's going to come with that you don't necessarily want to hear being passed off as being the truth on that, if you see what I'm saying. But that's just me. I just, over the years, found it more and more tiresome to listen to what I consider to be like fairly biased views because they're from the country and they have a falling out with the existing regime, or they're biased towards one political party. I mean, so if you think in the US context, right, if you asked American students, if you presented them as being the experts on the US to students from other countries, you might be surprised what comes out of their mouth, right? But if you actually make them to go do research as opposed to pulling it from the back of their head, thinking about, this is what I've been brought up to believe, as opposed to this is what I've discovered through research. That's my position on this, but that's not everybody's.
And another option along those lines is, especially in a group assignment, you have to know your students to be able to do this, but assign them a position to take. We have a Constitution class, so we assign topics, say gun control, and we assign one student that has to develop a case for gun control, and the other student has to develop a case for gun ownership. And they cannot use their personal opinions, and maybe their personal opinions are different. They have to go and find the research to support that position. And it makes it a very interesting study for the students to learn that other perspective. And I think that's what Bruce is getting to, and that's an excellent point.
Okay, great, thank you. We're out of time, unfortunately, but thank you very much, Bruce and Melanie, for the helpful discussion, and I hope you all enjoy this webinar, and please be on the lookout for future APSA programming related to teaching. So thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.